Got 1,000 questions coming from deep within. Wanna cut through the clutter. I need to know that my next move matters. And it all comes down to me, to be the change I wanna see. Unleash the energy, the synergy, that's where I wanna be. This feeling inside was there all along. Now I'm strong and I'm living with my power on. Gonna set my life in motion. Power on. Love, courage, and devotion. There's a spark to ignite. Flip the switch, bring the light. Power on. I see you in my reflection, the tears of joy and pain. Tradition is our connection, timeless wisdom from a precious chain. Everyone's got a different story, everyone's got a different name. We shine like the constellations, one heart but we're not the same. Let's light the planet with a new world vision, bring an end to the struggle and division. Look at your child and make that decision, to be better than yesterday. So hold your head high, sister, if you fall, I'm gonna walk on with you, through it all. Power on, gonna set my life in motion. Power on, love, courage, and devotion. There's a spark to ignite, flip the switch, bring the light. Power on, gonna lead with your soul now. Power on, we'll make this broken world whole now. Through the dark, see the light, be the spark to ignite. Power on. Be brilliant and shine, with heart and with mind. This world is waiting for the change you bring. Momentum is strong, and the road that we're on changes everything. Now sing power on, gonna set my life in motion. Power on, love, courage, and devotion. There's a spark to ignite, flip the switch, bring the light. Power on, gonna lead with your soul now. Power on, we'll make this broken world whole now. Through the dark, see the light, be the spark to ignite. Power on. Joburg to NYC, Montreal to Sweet Sydney, Budapest, Moscow, Santiago, Tel Aviv, and Chicago. Sisters and brothers in the tropic zone, Cancun, Panama, Boca Raton, DC, Toronto, San Antonio, Jerusalem, the city of gold, to the city of angels in the Golden State. Flip that switch and activate. Brooklyn Bridge to the Parthenon. Everybody get your power on. On the colors of the Pashmina, from Istanbul to Argentina, Cape Town. Between two oceans, a sea of change and a world in motion. Feel the momentum, feel the power. Feel the momentum in every hour. Feel the momentum, it's taking higher. Wake up to your soul's desire. Power on, sisters, power
Welcome to part 3 of our series on Momentum Boost, which we called Look Up, Stand Up, and Speak Up. I'm Adrienne Gold Davis, and I'm your host and facilitator for this series. Since October 7th, Momentum has brought 6 missions to Israel with over 900 people who came to learn and to bear witness and to volunteer and to stand in solidarity with our beloved homeland. And while we thought that we'd be coming to help Israel, what we quickly discovered was that we gained so much more than we could ever possibly give. You see, the resilience of the Jewish nation, and particularly the Israeli people, brought us a measure of commitment and comfort and growth that we could in turn bring home to our families and our communities and the world. We Jews are no strangers to times of crisis. It's part of our oscillating narrative. It's a history of strength and faith and of rebuilding. And as Jews in the diaspora, we are once again in challenging times. Anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attacks are up over 400%. We face anti-Israel protests. We faced social media slurs and student in campuses at our campuses, and we watch anti-Semitism hide itself behind the concept of just being anti-Zionist. We've seen our enemies hijack our narrative and manipulate the uninformed, sadly. And just a few short months ago, we were sitting at the Passover Seder and we were reciting that famous line in the Haggadah that says, in each generation, they will rise up against us. And I think that our generation thought that we were somehow exempt from this. And clearly that was an erroneous notion. But you, our alumni of over 25,000 people around the world, you asked us to help unpack all of this and to help you understand what our efforts should be in the face of all of it. Well, tonight, in the final of our three-part series, we are joined by the extraordinary Dr. Zohar Raviv. He is the International Vice President of Educational Strategy for Taglit-Birthright Israel. He is the Scholar in Residence for the I Center, and I'm thrilled to say he is also the Scholar in Residence this year for Momentum. Dr. Raviv is a renowned Jewish thought leader, and tonight he's going to help us reframe a very stereotypical Jewish narrative response and to help us ensure that our identities as Jews are not just responses to difficult moments. He's going to help us to identify with the beauty of our nation and the endurance of our people. It is now time to speak up. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zohar Raviv.
Thank you very much for these kind words. It is a pleasure and an honor to speak with all of you, in this case from my hotel room in New York City. In the next 40 minutes or so, I would like your permission to take you on a journey. By way of preface, I would say that the unfolding year arguably continues to be one of the most heart-wrenching times for the Jewish people and for Israel. As each morning ushers in another form of mourning, it is indeed a period deeply engulfed by angst, even despair. And while I was traveling the world these past few months, meeting with multiple Jewish leaders, stakeholders, policymakers, communities, and educators, I could not but deeply empathize with such feelings, let alone realize the high stakes for hope and human agency when addressing the daunting challenges in our complex contemporary world. And it is within this mind frame that I return once again to the wisdom of our ancestors, particularly in this case, the prophets of Israel. Unless any one of you thinks that I'm going to start reciting for you a prophecy of comfort, such as Isaiah 40, that is not my intent. Rather, I return to the prophets for a valuable lesson that they have taught us throughout the centuries, namely that leadership, leading oneself included, and despair don't go hand in hand, and that hope is an intrinsic element within the often baffling event we all call life. And as we embark on unpacking this statement, what better place to start our journey but with a prophet that we all call the master of all prophets, Moses. If we look at the book of Exodus, chapter 19, it features Moses at a very dramatic moment in his personal life and in the life of a nation. He stands atop of Mount Sinai. The thunders are booming. The Israelites are encamping around the mountain. And Moses finds himself in one of the most intimate rendezvous points with divinity. But before we get to that moment of the rendezvous point with divinity, let us think for a second about the Mount Sinai model in and of itself, which is a model which I've always found quite fascinating. Because what Mount Sinai gives us is unlike other theological constitutions, where divinity may come down to earth, cloaked in human form, such as in Christianity, or a prophet ascending all the way to the heavens to meet divinity, like Islam. Mount Sinai model teaches us a very, very different thing. If you climb, divinity will come down to meet you halfway. Mount Sinai is the rendezvous point, which is neither fully human nor fully divine. It is a diffusion of one within the other, which allows each human to find him or herself in the life of God. And as we follow what happens on the book of Exodus, in the book of Exodus, chapter 19, we find a remarkable verse that takes place on top of that mountain. And that verse says that God and Moses were engaged in some sort of a conversation. But the way the Torah presents it is quite compelling. It says, Moses spoke and God replied in a voice. That enigmatic sentence did not escape the eyes of our rabbis, who now asked, Matama, which means in Hebrew, what's the point of saying God replied in a voice, where the Torah can easily state God replied? Why does it state the word with a voice? To which Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, which is a 2nd century document, says something quite mind-boggling. It says when the Torah says that God replied in a voice, God replied using Moses' own voice. This remarkable interpretation now raises a foundational question with arresting ramifications. What did Moses hear? Were God and Moses engaged in a dialogue, conventionally understood as we have between two people? Or was he arguably engaged in what I would call an enriched monologue, which is the positioning of a soul on such a level of awareness as it understands its place and responsibility on the face of this earth as a creature created in the image of God? What we also learn from this is something quite remarkable for me as a Jew and as an educator. That Mount Sinai should not simply be viewed as a physical landscape in space and time. It is not only a mountain to marvel at.
Hello. Hi.
I
and
think
to
I have
think
a
about-
quick question.
Yes.
Sorry. For Melissa, is she?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
there's some interruption in the. Okay. Mount Sinai should not be only viewed as a mountain situated in space and time, as a physical location, as part of our collective memory. Mount Sinai should also be revealed and revered as the mental landscape of each human, the persistent call of our texts for each and every one of our Jewish people to ascend our own Mount Sinai in order to meet God answering us in our own voice. Mount Sinai is a model that basically comes and says, if you climb, I promise you, I will come down to meet you halfway. If you take the effort to ascend your own Mount Sinai, to remove yourself from the shackles of mediocrity, self-indulgence, and complacency, I will meet you halfway. If you allow yourself not only to see yourself as a human being, but commit yourself to becoming a human, I will meet you halfway. Mount Sinai is the eternal covenantal relationship between the human and his or her divine potential. In that respect, ladies and gentlemen, Mount Sinai reminds us all that we can start ascending our own mental scape, our own mental mountain at every moment, at every corner, at any instant of our lives. It is the perpetual signpost that reminds us that the aspiration to be better is always 5 seconds ahead of you. That mind frame in and of itself, the Mount Sinai of the soul, is something that I would arguably say governs our entire literature, prophetic literature in the Tanakh. Every prophet, if you think about it, is actually not a soothsayer, a fortune teller, or a crystal ball handler. That's a great misnomer on popular discourse about prophets. Prophets were not as engaged with foretelling the future as much as they were engaged with foretelling a possible future if humanity does not change its behavior and conduct. If you want to have a visualization of a prophet in the Bible, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest something that would resonate with you probably as one of Picasso's semi-grotesque pictures. A prophet is someone who has one eye vertically situated on God, another eye horizontally situated on humanity, and a mouth that now articulates the disparity between the left eye and the right eye. A prophet is someone who is perpetually plagued between sight and vision. A prophet is someone who is perpetually unhappy about what he or she sees because they are aware of what they can see. This is why, if you actually follow the prophetic literature, you will find that the byword of prophetic literature as a whole is not, this is going to happen, and this is surely about to happen. Not at all.
You don't.
It's one word that repeats itself over and over and over and over again. Shuvu, return. When a prophet calls the people of Israel a stiff-necked nation, he is speaking on behalf of divinity that now says to the prophet, I see only the neck of the Israelites because they have diverted their face from me. Return so I can see you eye to eye. And if you return, I shall meet you halfway. In that respect, my friends, prophecy is not about an absolute future. It is about a possible future. It is not contingent upon the prophet's vision, but rather it relies on humans' behavior, which now leads into the great paradox of prophecy, which I always found absolutely incredible. Because if you followed my line of reasoning up to this point, you will note something quite spectacular. An effective prophet, a successful prophet, a charismatic prophet, a prophet who managed to steer the hearts of his audience or her audience and have them return from their ways and reassume their place and align themselves with a divine charge, is actually a prophet whose prophecy did not come to pass. Because if he came to them and said, if you don't do so and so, this will happen, and they did repent, that thing will not happen. It's a great paradox which plagues the entire Bible. Because the Bible now asks, okay, so how do we actually know a true prophet from a false one if we cannot judge it by the outcome? We're digressing here, but I will suffice to say this. A prophet, a true prophet in the Bible, is he or she who seeks no profit. This prophetic paradox is perhaps best illustrated in a tiny book in the Bible called the Book of Jonah. Only 4 chapters, that's it. And a remarkable story. I'm sure you all read it before. I'm not sure you saw it in the context that I'm trying to present here. Jonah is asked by God to go to Nineveh. Nineveh is a major city of the Assyrian kingdom, not Jewish. And God says to Jonah, go to Nineveh and prophesy to them, because I've seen their wickedness on the face of this earth. And I want you to go and tell them that in 40 days, I'm going to overthrow the entire city. I'm going to raze it to the ground. Jonah, like many other prophets, by the way, is trying to avoid this burden of prophecy. You know, being a prophet is not necessarily the greatest honor for the one who assumes that role. Because if you understand, and I'm going to use a crude language for a second, a prophet is always, from the standpoint of the people, a prophet is an quote-unquote, oh shit moment. You never find a prophet in the Bible who comes to the Israelites and say, God, I spoke to God. He says, you're doing a great job. See you later. When a prophet appears in the arena, there is a disparity between the divine will and human conduct. That's the law of prophecy. So Yonah doesn't want to do it. He runs all over the place. He tries to get as far as he can from Tarshish. He's even turned into a sushi for 3 days, but that doesn't help him. He's eventually puked out of the fish's mouth, ends up in Nineveh, and reluctantly delivers the word of God. In 40 days, Nineveh will be overthrown. Up to this point, no surprises. Many prophets did that before with many other audiences. What happens next is quite amazing. The people of Nineveh actually take Jonah's prophecy very seriously. So much so that not only do they repent and put ashes and cloth on themselves, the king of Nineveh commands that the cattle and livestock will also be put under ashes and be not fed and repent for a few days. And then what happens based on the model I just told you? God says to Jonah, I decided to forgive the people of Nineveh because they have returned from their wicked ways. If the story ended here, which is the end of the 3rd chapter, we could have easily crowned Jonah to be one of the best prophets in the biblical narrative. He was apparently very charismatic, very persuasive, great oratory skills, and he managed to transform a whole city, a whole sin city, towards acts of morality, benevolence, and human righteousness. A fantastic prophet up to this point. Alas, the story does not end here. We have one more chapter which proves Jonah to be a failed prophet from that side. Because Jonah is actually upset with God for making a mockery out of him and turning him into a liar. Why? Because of exactly the paradox that I mentioned before. His prophecy was not fulfilled because he was successful. And he doesn't get it. He does not get it. God teaches him a beautiful lesson in the desert. I won't bore you there. Go and read chapter 4 of Jonah, and you'll see the incredible lesson that God gives Jonah to explain to him what is the true agency of a prophet. Which means the true agency of a prophet, and that's what I called leadership many years, and Adrian has heard me say that many, many times before, is the ability to mobilize a people from a world in which we live into a world in which we believe. And the point I was trying to make here, ladies and gentlemen, that when we look at prophecy from this standpoint, each and every one of us is the potential prophet of our own lives. The call to action is not a lofty idea. The call to speak up and stand for what is right is not a noble quest. It is actually intrinsic to the human condition if the human is truly committed to search for meaning, import, conviction in this life. And if you look at one of the last things that Moses said to the people of Israel, we're returning now to Moses. He said to them something quite profound. Lo b'shamayim hi, it is not in the heavens for you to ask who is going to bring this wisdom down to us. Lo me'ever layami, it is not on the other side of the ocean to ask who will go there and bring it back to us. Beficha ubelevavcha la'asoto. This wisdom is in your mind, in your heart, in your thoughts, in your deeds, and in your mouth. Transformation happens from within. This is why I believe that leadership and despair simply do not go hand in hand. As long as I breathe, that's the message I'm sending. As long as I breathe, that's the message I hear from my God. As long as I am here, there is hope. Not because I'm going to bring it from anywhere else, but rather because it is generated from within. In that respect, the entire Jewish mindset, the liturgy, the prayer, the standing, is all about what I call the great tango between a sense of grandeur and a sense of humility. I am one and only. There's no one else like me. That is a statement that runs true to each and every one of you. I am truly a part of God above. That's the grandeur. And at the same time, the sense of humility, I'm only part of God above. And if you want to think about it as members of a community where each and every one of you is existentially necessary, think about the Western Wall for a second and take one brick out. One. It won't be the Western Wall anymore. Each and every one of us is a brick. but it's not only a brick, it's a necessary brick. The call to speak up is not a luxury. The call to speak up, to stand up for what you believe is right, is intrinsic for hope. Because as the prophet teach us over and over and over again, even a prophet cannot determine your fate. Your fate is entirely in your hands, and our fate is entirely in our hands. I will stop now, and I want to allow a few minutes for feedback, Q&A, because I want to be respectful of the time allotted to us together today.
Am I on? Amanda, do you have me on the screen? Oh, there I am. Oh, please, like, I just, my heart, you know, I don't know if you could hear me typing along, but everything you say, of course, I have to write down because it's gonna become a meme or I'm gonna use it myself. I want to ask you something. On our trips, and I've heard you speak before, of the fact that most people's Jewish identity, many people's Jewish identity, is tied into tragic occurrences. And that is not empowering. In fact, in many ways, it's disempowering. Can you speak briefly to this audience about that concept and how, if you do want to speak up, you have to attach yourself to something greater than our biggest tragedies?
Absolutely. I'll say it very, very briefly, but nonetheless, it's an important question. I often say to groups whom I meet, including, of course, the wonderful groups of Momentum, that we cannot sustain a healthy Jewish body on a perpetual diet of tragedies. And I refuse, for one, to be identified by the ways I die. We are the ever-living people, not the ever-dying people. And the story of the Jewish people needs to change accordingly, because we have a great story, but oftentimes the way we narrate our own story is the exact opposite of that story. So I said it once and I'll say it again. The destruction of the first temple is not a Jewish event. It's an event imposed on Jews. The destruction of the second temple is not a Jewish event. It's an event imposed on Jews. The Holocaust is not a Jewish event. It's an event imposed on Jews. October 7th is not a Jewish event. It's an event imposed on Jews. The Jewish events in all of those are the commitment of those events to memory and the way we brought together and brought into bear our most venerated values as a people in response to these events. Those are the Jewish events. There is nothing Jewish about Auschwitz. There's nothing Jewish about Majdanek. There's nothing Jewish about the rape of a woman. Those are not Jewish events. And we need to make a very clear distinction between commemorating and remembering the catastrophes that have befallen us, which is a sacred duty, and turning those catastrophes into the bywords of our Jewish identity formation. So like I said earlier, many a time, I am a Jew despite of October 7th, not because of October 7th. I am a Jew despite the Holocaust, not because of the Holocaust. I am a Jew because I believe the Jewish identity should be formed and based on the inner mechanisms and values of Jewish life, rather than be based on external threats to Jewish living. Fighting anti-Semitism is not an educational goal in Judaism. It's an outcome. The goal is to create informed, resilient, proud, meaning-seeking Jews that are motivated in Judaism. It's called mida'ato, out of their own volition and mind, into being Jewish, because they believe in the inner mechanisms of Jewish life and the accumulated wisdom of our traditions. And one of the outcomes of such a process will be people who now stand up to anti-Semites because they are motivated from the inside to do so and not trained from the outside to do so.
So,
I was
Zohar,
born a Jew to celebrate Judaism, not to defend it.
So I understand this and it lifts my heart and it's the way I'm trying to move through the world. But help me understand then why it is that events like October 7th woke so many of us up. Is it because we're afraid for ourselves? Is it because we don't have an identity outside of, oh, look, every generation they're going to rise up against us? And how do you take that fear and turn it into what you're saying? Because it seems to me that when people are afraid, they're less effective at speaking out. And yet it seems like only when we're afraid do we wake up out of our stupor. That's a paradox to me.
In the human condition, not only the Jewish one, the gravitational pull of tragedy has always been awesome. The question that we need to deal with is not whether there is a gravitational pull, because it exists, that's part of who we are, but rather, what do we do with it? And my argument is that instead of being addicted to tragedies as the founding blocks of our accumulated identity, because they are not, I say, first of all, do not fear. I understand this, but do not fear. I have a reason to be optimistic because I'm also seeing around me a great wave of Jewish awareness, a great wave of Jewish awakening. But the most important thing is that fear creates a reality that is dependent on the external mechanisms around us rather than on the internal motivations within us. And that's what I want to fight. I think that if Jews come together from the inward, start understanding that what Judaism has to say about life, about community, about networking, about understanding that as a Jew, you never stand alone, then we will start speaking up, not only in order to educate others or to protest against external threats, we will start to speak up in order to articulate things that have been long since been dormant in our collective memory and collective psyche.
I think that might be what it means to be truly to be a light among nations, is when you are not, when your light is not under a barrel or hidden in from coming from a place of fear, but when your light is a truly joyful expression of everything that is part of your, pardon my pun, birthright, then I suspect you speak out without even uttering a single word.
Utter silence is the glory of thy name. Sometimes we need to remove ourselves from conventional modes of thought in order to revisit things that we have learned to take for granted. And I think that we are now, and I'm really serious at this, I think that the only thing that I can identify that is greater than the calamity that we have faced on October 7th in Israel and October 8th in other parts of the world is the incredible awakening and opportunity that lies at our doorstep for a people revisiting their own narrative and a people committed to truly start telling our story in the appropriate context, in the appropriate language, from a positively felt, proudful standpoint, rather than continue to perpetuate victimization as the founding block of a very ill-informed identity.
So are you suggesting that instead of pouring millions of dollars into Holocaust museums, there should be cultural centers? How do you shift the paradigm on that one?
Actually, that's something I've been talking about for the better part of 20 years, where I suggested to multiple cities not to, God forbid, take down their institutions, but instead of calling them Holocaust institutions, renovate the entire building, call it a museum of Jewish life and Jewish living, and definitely have a room within that building that is dedicated to the Holocaust and other interruptions to our stories throughout history. But as long as we are addicted to ushering in people to get to know us through the way we die rather than through the way we live, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
So
And
let
at
me
the
ask
end
you
of the
something.
day-
This is probably a controversial question, and God forbid if I'm putting words into anyone's mouth. But it seems to me that if our children have been raised on a steady diet of our tragedies, and they think of themselves and their Jewish identity as responding to what they perceive as the mistreatment of our people, does it not make sense that many of them who don't really know anything about Jewish life would align themselves with those today who say that we are perpetuating tragedies against other people? Should I try that again?
No, I understand what you said. I'm not sure that we can unpack such a question in 2 or 3 minutes because I don't see any equanimity between the ideas. I think that the ethical question around what is being done is a valid question.
No. I'm not saying that it's an ethical question. I'm saying that our kids who have no Jewish identity whatsoever only identify with this was done to us, so now we have to be hypersensitive to other people. They have no perspective outside of that, so it's very, very easy to manipulate them. You know what? That's for another conversation. We've got another 15 minutes. Would it be okay if you take some of the questions from the audience? I'm going to read them to you if you don't mind. This one from hold on, Dr. Raviv from Rena. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom. Could you please comment on if being Jewish is a religion, tradition, or is it a being?
I'm always curious about the human need to tag and identify everything within convenient packaging. Judaism is all of the above and more. But I can tell you, of course, that whereas the religious aspect of Judaism is a foundational aspect of its makeup, Judaism is not a religion. In other words, there is something about Judaism which I find incredibly complex in form of putting together very deep philosophical approaches to morality, to society, to the world. I definitely don't think that Judaism is the only one that figured it out. Far from it. What I love about Judaism is that it has, through 4 millennia, has amassed and accumulated wisdom, which allows me not only to wrestle with past generations, but also to agree with certain things that they say and vehemently disagree with other things that they say. And what I love about the Jewish mindset is that it endorses it. Judaism, as I always said, was never afraid of difference in opinions. It fears indifference the most. It is not afraid of Jews sitting around a table and arguing about everything. That's, by the way, called the Talmud.
Yeah.
It is afraid of the empty chair. It is not a subject matter to be studied. It is a state of mind to become. So it is everything that you asked and more.
Another question. Given your experience with Taglit-Birthright, there are many of us mothers who are wondering what our approach needs to be addressing our children about these times. I'm not speaking of the small kids. I think that's a very separate sort of parenting class. But I'm talking about teenagers, like say 13 or 14 to 20. How would you suggest a mother speaks up during these times, understanding that her college-age student is going to be facing a whole other battery of issues, but while the child is still in your house, to acknowledge that it's happening at a time where they don't really want to hear what we say? Do we have an obligation to speak up, and what, based on your experience with young people, is a good way to enter?
As a matter of fact, I believe that even younger kids
Mhm.
are deeply affected by what's happening around them, and deeply desire some sort of a venue to unpack the feelings of confusion, bafflement, trepidation, even sometimes fear that they may have, depends on the context.
Embarrassment, humiliation, all of those things.
All of those things. And those are all legitimate feelings, understandable feelings that need to be effectively addressed rather than judged. I think that, part of being a parent, and I'm a parent myself to somebody who's becoming an adolescent now, is to understand that it's not your kid. The fact that your kid does not speak to you about those issues does not necessarily mean that they're not interested in those issues.
Huh.
So my advice would be, and that's what I do at least, that when I feel that my child is in need of a conversation, but does not necessarily find me to be the most viable conduit to brush her concerns against, to find that kind of a conduit, either through someone else that she or he trusts, or to try and actually, instead of initiating a conversation, listening to what they're asking, because many times their question comes from a very different perspective or from a very different angle, but leads to something that runs far deeper. I would say this, though. Let them understand that they are not alone in their confusion, that they are not alone in there. I think that loneliness is probably one of the greatest challenges that we face today with young adults and with young people in general.
Sure.
I think that their sense of feeling that they are part of a much larger group of people who are as equally baffled as they are can give them a lot of reassurance.
I appreciate that. Another question. How do college students handle professors who are teaching anti-Semitism in classes? For context, she says, I have 2 children at George Washington University, which is a very Jewish school, but they're
It's very apt that they go to George Washington University, because part of my answer here will include George Washington, the president.
Huh.
In the 18th century, George Washington visited the town of Newport, Rhode Island. He visited the Jewish community there, and he wrote them a letter, which I strongly advise each and every one of you to read. It's called George Washington's Letter to the Abrahamic Flock of Newport, Rhode Island. And there, George Washington pledges to stand at the forefront of a government which, quote, gives to bigotry no sanction and to persecution no assistance, end quote. The reason I'm giving you this quote by George Washington is because one of the shortcomings of the Jewish community, not only in North America, but in many other parts of the world, is that we have a tendency to appropriate our problems as Jewish issues and take care of them within the Jewish community. And by doing so, we are exonerating the other elements of society from taking any responsibility or being held accountable for what's happening. This is exactly one of the problems, one of the reasons what we're seeing right now happening, because the result of many years of neglect. We must stop seeing anti-Semitism on and off campus as being a Jewish issue. It is not an onslaught on Jewish values. It's an onslaught on American values. When the woman who asked the question, when your children are being harassed at George Washington University, it is not an attack on Jewish students. It's an attack on American citizens who are Jewish. Anti-Semitism should be regarded an onslaught on the civil freedoms of citizens, and it should become a mainstream discussion in American society. Unfortunately, the Jewish people a lot of the times appropriate our own problems and we want to deal with them from within. And by doing so, we're actually letting many decision makers around us off the hook. This cannot change until we are able to bring allies, and there are allies in the American society who are as appalled as we are by displays of anti-Semitism. And we must work together with them in order to turn anti-Semitism and any other form of bigotry into mainstream discourse. This is, by the way, one of the greatest victories of Black Lives Matter, is that it managed to take this issue and turn it into a mainstream discussion.
True.
It's not only a Black issue anymore. It's not only an African-American issue anymore. The Jewish people continuously, for multiple reasons, I won't get into the historical, psychological reasons, we tend to try and wash the laundry inside the house. And this does not fit the liberal, democratic, social discourse in which we live today. We need to make sure that we stop treating anti-Semitism as a Jewish problem and start treating it as an ailment on modern, democratic, liberal societies wherever they are.
I want to ask you one more question. From Michelle, how do we balance being strong and resilient Jews and not victims with the rest of the world that then see us as too strong and privileged? I'm thinking of Dara Horn's book, People Love Dead Jews, but not so much living proud ones.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I'm fully aware of the fact that the paradigm shift that I'm presenting here is something that needs to be digested slowly and gradually. That is not a problem for me. I always, and Andrea, you heard me say that many times before, I believe that as any leader and any visionary needs to think as a revolutionist and implement as an evolutionist.
Okay, wait, say that again and slow it down. I'm not understanding that. Say that again.
Think as a revolutionist
Think as a revolutionist.
and implement as an evolutionist. In other words, think big, bold, courageous, but then exercise the humility and the patience to let it unfold and unpack in its own natural time. I don't expect this mindset to sink in a week, a month, or a year. This is something that will take a lot of education, a lot of people who start sharing this kind of language, but I staunchly believe that this is the right place and the right trajectory for our people.
I got to
But-
tell you something, Zara, I'm thinking to myself, this is also the identical paradigm for parenting. You know, we try and move that battleship overnight. We can't figure out why what we're demanding, what we're needing, what we're saying is not being followed immediately. And we forget that, you know, the trajectory of a child's brain becoming mature and figuring things out is sometimes longer than we can be bothered to wait. So we can have those big notions, but we should be less, are you telling us that we should be less frustrated when they're just not listening, you know, that we have to like slow the whole thing down in our
Absolutely.
expectations?
Absolutely, and more than that.
Tell me.
There is a beautiful, quite fascinating paradox that we find in each generation, where each generation is a rebel when it looks at its parents and becomes a conservative when it looks at its children. In other words, each generation has the audacity to look at its parents and say, you're wrong, and then look at its children and say, you're wrong too. In other words, the exercising parenthood is also an exercise in humility.
No kidding.
It's an exercise in humility. And sometimes it is better for us to remind ourselves how we were as kids in order to absorb some of the brunt of our own kids vis-a-vis the way they look at us. And I think that that's actually a very good practice.
Whoa, I think that this part of the recording is going to be played over and over again. Somebody earlier sent me a text saying that her child thinks she's been brainwashed with Zionism and all the Jewish stuff, and that they're not brainwashed. And when I think back on my own behavior as an adolescent and a young woman, and I look at the way I react to some of my children's points of view today, this may have been not just speak up about these times, but perhaps some of the best parenting advice I've received in a very long time. Evolution, Julia wrote, evolution at the speed of a generation.
Yeah,
Whoa.
I saw it. It's brilliant.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
gorgeous.
beautiful.
Oh, I cannot thank you enough. I don't even know what to say, but I do want to tell our viewers, our listeners, whoever is on here at the moment, that of course, if you want more of Dr. Zohar Raviv, you got to download the Yom app. If you don't already have it, download it tonight. The Yom app is the Momentum app, and there's such tremendous content from Dr. Raviv on it that is, you'll just want to listen to it and share it. From the bottom of my heart, I'm sure you're jet lagged, you're in a hotel room. Thank you. Thank you for all of it. If I take one thing away personally, and I guess what's resonating for me about the speak up piece of it, is that speaking up requires not running away from climbing up our own mountain.
Exactly. Well put. We are all mountaineers of our own souls.
Oh, I just, we're mountaineers of our own souls. That's a t-shirt. You need to
We're
say
all
that in
mountaineers.
Aspen.
We are all
Thank you.
mountaineers of our
Thank
own
you, Dr.
souls. God
Raviv.
bless you,
Thank you.
guys. God bless you. Laila Tov.
Lala Tov,
Laila
you're
Tov.
amazing.
Toda rabba. Laila Tov.
Oh, toda rabba. Okay, everybody listen. Our mission at Momentum is more important now than ever before, as you can see. After October 7th, the Momentum women are standing up and speaking up and climbing up. And we need you to help us unlock the power of even more Jewish women, Jewish mothers across the world. So those of you who follow me on Facebook will know, because I've been obsessing about it all day today, but our annual fundraising campaign is coming up September 25th and 26th, and you have 36 hours. We're going to raise $1 million. Everything gets doubled. We're going to do a one $18 donation that becomes 36 at a time, or one 1,800 that becomes 3,600, or 18 million that becomes, you get my point, right? And I'm hoping that you are dedicated supporters will help us get this rolling. Because you're on this boost, if you make a gift tonight, if you'd like to, in absolutely any amount, we'll get it matched dollar for dollar, and we'll add it to the campaign when it goes live on September 25th. And I just also want to tell you one final important thing. On October the 6th, Momentum is doing a memorial experience for the victims of October 7th, for the Yortzeit, the year anniversary of October 7th. You'll get information on it. And when you get the recording of this, you'll get even more information on it. It's going to be during the day, Eastern Standard Time, on October 6th, when we really need to support each other. The beautiful ceremony and resources that you can do in your own home and so on. But in the meantime, for tonight, on behalf of all of us at Momentum, on behalf of myself and Eve Levy and Zohar Raviv, who've just, given you our hearts for the last few weeks for this, and on behalf of all of us who are struggling to get this right, struggling not to go hide and get swallowed by a whale, struggling to climb up our own Mount Sinai's, I bless all of us to listen to this paradigm shift and to remember that you're not alone. And part of the beauty of Momentum's goal to change a mother, impact a mother so she can impact her family, and impact enough families so you can change communities, and impact enough communities so you can change the world. Each and every one of us are that brick in the wall he was talking about. May we all climb those mountains ourselves. Momentum is always here for all of us. I wish you all well and blessings. Good night, everybody.
Night.